Emma Williams turned her car onto Maple Street as the evening shadows grew longer across the quiet neighborhood of Millbrook. The digital clock on her dashboard showed 9:30 p.m. And she felt the familiar tiredness that came after spending 12 hours at the federal courthouse. As a prosecutor, Emma was used to these long days, but tonight felt different somehow. She had been working on a complex case involving drug trafficking that was affecting families throughout their small town. The evidence was strong, and tomorrow she would present her final arguments to ensure these criminals faced justice. Emma took pride in her work, knowing that each case she won made Millbrook a safer place for everyone. The street lights created pools of warm yellow light along the tree-lined road. Emma loved this neighborhood with its neat houses and well-maintained gardens. 2 years ago, she had saved enough money to buy her own small house here, a dream she had worked towards since graduating from law school. Every morning when she left for work and every evening when she returned, she felt grateful for how far she had come. As she drove past the Johnson family's house, Emma noticed their porch light was still on. Mrs. Johnson often waited up for her husband who worked night shifts at the hospital. It was these small details that made Emma feel connected to her community. She was not just a prosecutor fighting crime in abstract terms, but someone who understood the real people she was protecting. Suddenly, red and blue lights flashed in her rearview mirror, cutting through the peaceful evening like a harsh alarm. Emma's stomach dropped as she looked at her speedometer. She had been driving well under the speed limit, carefully as always. Her hands tightened on the steering wheel as she pulled over to the curb, wondering what could possibly be wrong. She turned off her engine and rolled down her window, placing both hands visible on the steering wheel as she had been taught long ago. The cold evening air rushed into her car, carrying the scent of autumn leaves and the distant sound of a television from a nearby house. Officer Roberts approached her window with heavy footsteps. Emma could see his reflection in her side mirror before he reached her car. His expression was stern and unfriendly, and his hand rested on his belt in a way that made Emma feel uneasy. She had dealt with many police officers in her professional life, and usually found them to be respectful colleagues in the fight for justice, license, and registration. Officer Roberts demanded without any greeting or explanation. His voice was cold and commanding, lacking the professional courtesy Emma was accustomed to receiving. Emma kept her movements slow and deliberate as she reached for her purse. "Good evening, officer," she said in her calmest, most respectful voice. "May I ask what I did wrong?" "I believe I was following all traffic laws," Officer Roberts stared at her through the window, his eyes scanning her face and then looking into her car. "You were driving suspiciously through this neighborhood," he replied, his tone becoming even sharper and more unfriendly. "This isn't the kind of area people like you usually visit." "What are you really doing here?" The words hit Emma like a physical blow. She felt her cheeks grow warm with embarrassment and hurt, but she forced herself to remain calm. Over the years, she had encountered prejudice in various forms, and she had learned that maintaining her dignity was always her strongest response. Getting angry or defensive would only make things worse. "I live in this neighborhood, officer," Emma explained quietly, her voice steady despite the pain she felt inside. "I'm returning home from work at the courthouse. I'm a federal prosecutor." But Officer Roberts did not seem interested in her explanation. He examined her license with suspicious eyes, taking much longer than necessary. Emma could hear him speaking into his radio. Though she could not make out the words, the minutes stretched on, and Emma watched as lights came on in nearby houses. She hoped her neighbors would not think she was some kind of criminal. "Step out of the vehicle," Officer Roberts finally commanded, his attitude growing more hostile by the minute. Emma's heart began to race, but she complied without argument. She knew that resisting would only make her situation worse, even though she had done nothing wrong. Within minutes, Emma found herself in handcuffs. The cold metal felt shocking against her wrists as Officer Roberts placed her under arrest for charges that seemed to have no basis in reality. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, trying to center herself and maintain the inner strength that had carried her through law school and her demanding career. As she sat in the back of the police car, Emma thought about tomorrow. She would have to appear before Judge William Ashford, a man she had heard about but never met personally. His reputation was that of a strict but fair judge who believed in upholding the law without favoritism. Emma held onto this hope as the police car drove through the streets of the neighborhood she called home. Tomorrow would bring answers, and Emma prayed that justice and fairness would prevail over the prejudice she had encountered tonight. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of the Millbrook courthouse as people filled the wooden benches in Judge William Ashford's courtroom, the familiar sounds of shuffling papers. Quiet conversations and the court clerk calling names created the usual morning atmosphere that Judge Ashford had grown accustomed to over his 20 years on the bench. Judge Ashford adjusted his black robes as he reviewed the morning's cases. He took pride in running an efficient courtroom where justice was served swiftly and lessons were learned. The people of Millbrook trusted him to maintain order and teach those who broke the law that action this had consequences. He believed strongly that his firm approach helped keep their community safe and peaceful. Emma Williams sat in the back row of the courtroom, her hands folded in her lap as she waited for her name to be called. She had barely slept the night before, spending hours in a holding cell that smelled of disinfectant and despair. The experience had been humiliating. But she had used the time to think and prepare herself mentally for this moment. She wore her best professional blazer, the same navy blue one she had worn to court many times as a prosecutor. Her hair was neatly pulled back, and despite the sleepless night, she carried herself with the quiet confidence that had served her well throughout her legal career. Emma knew that appearance mattered in a courtroom, and she wanted to present herself with dignity and respect. Round her, other defendants waited nervously for their cases to be called. Some looked scared, others angry, and the few seemed resigned to whatever fate awaited them. Emma felt sympathy for these people, understanding now what it felt like to sit on this side of the courtroom. She had always tried to be fair and compassionate as a prosecutor, but this experience was giving her a new perspective on how frightening the justice system could feel. The court clerk, Mrs. Patterson, called out names in her clear, practiced voice. Each person stood and walked forward to face Judge Ashford, who delivered his decisions with the authority of someone who believed he understood right from wrong completely. Emma watched as he handled case after case, noting his tone and manner. With each defendant, Emma Williams, Mrs. Patterson finally called, her voice echoing through the courtroom. Emma stood up slowly, taking a deep breath to steady her nerves. She walked forward with the same confident stride she had used hundreds of times before when approaching the bench as a prosecutor. Her years of courtroom experience had taught her the importance of projecting calm and respect, even in difficult circumstances. Judge Ashford looked up from his papers as Emma approached. He saw a young woman in professional attire, but his mind had already formed conclusions based on the police report he had read earlier that morning. Officer Roberts had described a suspicious person who did not belong in a respectable neighborhood, and Judge Ashford trusted the officer's judgment completely. "Miss Williams," Judge Ashford began, his voice carrying the weight and authority that came from years of making decisions that affected people. "These lives, you stand before this court charged with suspicious behavior and resisting an officer's instructions." Emma listened carefully to every word, her hands folded in front of her in a gesture of respect she had learned long ago. both in her personal life and professional career, that there were moments when patience was more powerful than immediate action. Sometimes you had to wait for exactly the right moment to speak your truth. And that moment had not yet arrived. The judge continued reading from the police report, his tone becoming more disapproving with each word. Emma could feel the eyes of everyone in the courtroom watching her, making assumptions about who she was and what she had done. The feeling was uncomfortable and unfamiliar, so different from the respect she usually received in these same halls of justice. "Young lady," Judge Ashford said, his voice taking on a tone that Emma found deeply condescending and hurtful. "I see far too many people like you who think they can do whatever they please without consequences. You were clearly in a neighborhood where you didn't belong, causing trouble for law-abiding citizens." The words cut through Emma like a sharp knife, each assumption more painful than the last. She felt her cheeks grow warm with embarrassment and anger, but she forced herself to remain absolutely calm and composed. Throughout her career as a prosecutor, she had learned that real strength came from maintaining dignity even when others showed none toward you. Judge Ashford leaned forward in his chair, preparing to deliver what he considered an important lesson in personal responsibility and respect for the law. His experience had taught him that firm words and appropriate consequences could help guide people toward better choices in the future. He had no idea that the woman standing before him was about to challenge every assumption he had made. The courtroom remained quiet as Judge Ashford gathered his thoughts, ready to pronounce sentence on someone he believed needed to learn about. Respecting authority and staying in her proper place, he was completely unaware that his own understanding of justice was about to be transformed in a way that would change not only this case, but his entire approach to serving the people of MILLBROOK. Emma stood perfectly still, waiting for the right moment to reveal the truth that would shake the very foundations of everyone's assumptions. The tension in the courtroom was thick as Judge Ashford prepared to deliver his judgment. Emma Williams stood before him, her posture straight and dignified despite everything she had endured over the past 12 hours. She had listened patiently to his assumptions and accusations, but now she knew the moment had arrived to speak her truth. "Before you continue, Your Honor," Emma said in a clear, respectful voice that carried across the silent courtroom, "may I please address the court?" Judge Ashford paused mid-sentence, his eyebrows furrowing with slight annoyance at being interrupted during what he considered an important teaching moment. He had been about to explain to this young woman why her behavior was unacceptable and what consequences she would face. The interruption seemed disrespectful to his authority. "Very well," he replied with obvious impatience, "but make it brief. I have other cases to hear this morning." Emma nodded respectfully and reached into the leather briefcase she had been carrying, the same briefcase that had accompanied her through countless court appearances, late-night case preparations, and important meetings with fellow attorneys. Her movements were calm and deliberate as she opened it and withdrew a leather portfolio that contained her most important professional documents. The courtroom, which had been filled with the usual morning sounds of shuffling papers and quiet conversations, suddenly fell completely silent. Every person present seemed to sense that something significant was about to happen. The court reporter stopped typing momentarily, and even the security guard near the door turned his attention fully to the scene unfolding before the bench. Emma opened the portfolio with steady hands and pulled out her federal prosecutor credentials. The official documents bore the seal of the United States District Attorney's Office and a photograph, along with her full title and authority within the federal justice system. She had earned these credentials through years of hard work, dedication, and an unwavering commitment to serving justice fairly and equally. "Your Honor," Emma began, her voice now carrying the quiet authority that came from years of presenting cases in courtrooms just like this one. My name is Emma Williams, and I am an assistant federal prosecutor with the district attorney's office. The words hung in the air like a bombshell. Judge Ashford's confident expression began to change as the meaning of her words sank in. Several people in the courtroom gallery leaned forward in their seats, straining to hear every word of this unexpected revelation. Emma continued speaking with the same professional composure she used when addressing juries during important trials. Last night, I was returning home after preparing a case to prosecute individuals who have been trafficking drugs in our community. I had spent 12 hours reviewing evidence and witness statements to ensure that these criminals would face appropriate justice for the harm they have caused to families throughout Millbrook. She stepped forward and placed her credentials on Judge Ashford's desk with hands that remained perfectly steady despite the emotional weight of the moment. The official documents seemed to glow under the courtroom's fluorescent lights, their authenticity undeniable and their implications staggering. I was driving through that neighborhood because I live there, Your Honor, Emma explained, her voice growing stronger with each word. I purchased my home on Maple Street 2 years ago with money I earned through years of law school and dedicated service to this very justice system that we are all sworn to uphold. Judge Ashford picked up the credentials with hands that had begun to tremble slightly. His face, which had been flushed with confidence and authority just moments before, now began to drain of all color as he examined the official documents. The photograph on the credential showed the same woman who stood before him, but now he was seeing her completely differently. The court clerk, Mrs. Patterson, who had worked in this courtroom for over 15 years and had seen countless cases come and go, gasped softly and covered her mouth with her hand. She had never witnessed anything quite like this moment in all her years of court service. Even Officer Roberts, who had been standing at the back of the courtroom with his arms crossed and a satisfied expression on his face, shifted uncomfortably from one foot to the other. The confidence he had felt about his rest the night before was rapidly evaporating as he began to understand the magnitude of his mistake. Emma continued speaking with the grace and strength that had carried her through law school, through difficult cases, and through moments of personal challenge throughout her career. I have spent my career fighting to ensure that justice is truly blind, Your Honor, that it sees beyond the color of someone's skin or the assumptions we make about where people belong or what they are capable of achieving. Judge Ashford stared down at the credentials in his hands, feeling their weight both physically and symbolically. The leather portfolio felt heavier than it should have, carrying as it did the full weight of his prejudgment and the terrible mistake he had made. Every assumption he had voiced, every condescending word he had spoken, now echoed in his mind with painful clarity. The silence in the courtroom stretched long and uncomfortable as truth filled the space where assumptions had lived for so many years. Everyone present understood that they were witnessing a moment that would change everything, not just for this case, but for how justice would be viewed in their community from this day forward. Judge William Ashford set down Emma's credentials with hands that shook so badly he could barely control them. The official documents seemed to burn his fingers as he placed them carefully on his desk, each seal and signature a reminder of how terribly wrong he had been. For the first time in his 20-year career as a judge, he felt the crushing weight of his own bias pressing down on his shoulders like a heavy stone. The courtroom remained completely silent, as if everyone present was holding their breath and waiting to see what would happen next. The usual sounds of a busy courthouse had disappeared completely. No one coughed, no papers rustled, and even the old building itself seemed to have stopped creaking. All eyes were focused on her. Judge and the woman who had just revealed a truth that changed everything. Judge Ashford's mind raced as he tried to process what had just happened. He thought about all the cases he had heard over the years, all the people he had judged, and all the assumptions he had made without even realizing it. The weight of those decisions now felt unbearable as he wondered how many other times he had been wrong about someone standing before his bench. "Miss Williams," he began, his voice barely above a whisper and so different from the confident, authoritative tone he had used just minutes earlier. His throat felt dry and tight as he struggled to find the right words. "I owe you a profound apology." Emma continued to stand tall before him, but something in her posture had changed. Instead of the defensive stance of someone being accused, she now carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who had revealed an important truth. When her eyes met the judge's, he was surprised to see compassion there rather than the anger he deserved. "Your Honor," Emma replied, her voice warm and understanding in a way that made Judge Ashford feel even worse about his behavior. "We all make mistakes. What matters most is what we learn from them and how we choose to grow." Judge Ashford felt tears beginning to form in his eyes as the full impact of her words hit him. He stood up slowly from his chair, his legs feeling unsteady beneath him. He removed his glasses with shaking hands and wiped his eyes. Not caring that everyone in the courtroom could see his emotion, the judicial composure he had maintained for 2 decades seemed unimportant now compared to the human moment he was experiencing. "No, Miss Williams," he said, his voice growing stronger as he spoke. "This goes much deeper than a simple mistake. I looked at you and saw only my own assumptions and prejudices. I completely failed to see your dignity, your education, your years of dedicated service to our community." He turned away from Emma to address the entire courtroom, knowing that this moment needed to be witnessed and remembered by everyone present. Court reporters, lawyers, defendants, family members, and court staff all listened as he continued speaking with a vulnerability they had never seen from him before. "I have just learned a lesson that will fundamentally change how I serve justice in this courtroom," Judge Ashford announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. "Every single person who stands before this bench deserves to be seen for who they truly are, not judged by the color of their skin or by preconceived notions about where they belong or what they are see." Capable of achieving, Emma stepped forward, slightly, her movement drawing the judge's attention back to her. When she spoke, her voice carried the warmth and understanding that had helped her connect with juries throughout her prosecutorial career. "Your Honor," she said gently, "this moment can become a bridge to something much better than what happened before. We can use this experience to help others learn what we have learned here today. We can make sure that other people do not have to go through what I went through last night and this morning." The young prosecutor's grace in the face of such obvious injustice moved everyone present in the courtroom. She could have demanded punishment for the judge and the officer who had treated her so badly. She could have used this moment to humiliate them or seek revenge for the pain and embarrassment they had caused her. Instead, she had chosen forgiveness over revenge, education over humiliation, and hope over bitterness. Mrs. Patterson, the court clerk, wiped tears from her own eyes as she watched this extraordinary display of character and strength. She had seen many dramatic moments in her 15 years of court service, but nothing had ever moved her quite like watching Emma Williams respond to injustice with such dignity and wisdom. Officer Roberts, still standing at the back of the courtroom, felt his own eyes filling with tears as he began to understand the full impact of his actions the night before. He had arrested a fellow servant of justice, someone who was working just as hard as he was to keep their community safe. But he had been blinded by his own assumptions and prejudices. Judge Ashford nodded slowly as Emma's words sank deep into his heart and mind. He knew with absolute certainty that his life had been forever changed by this remarkable woman who had shown him what true strength and character looked like. She had turned a moment of injustice into an opportunity for growth and healing, not just for herself, but for everyone who had witnessed what happened in his courtroom that morning. 3 months had passed since that life-changing morning in Judge William Ashford's courtroom, and the changes were visible everywhere. The courthouse that had once felt cold and intimidating now welcomed visitors with colorful signs, promoting equality and justice hanging on the walls. The message was clear to everyone who entered. This was a place where all people would be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their background or appearance. Judge Ashford had spent those 3 months completely transforming how his courtroom operated. He had implemented comprehensive training programs about unconscious bias for all court staff, from security guards to court clerks to bailiffs. Every person who worked in the building now understood how their assumptions could affect the way they treated others, and they had learned practical ways to recognize and overcome their prejudices. Emma Williams sat quietly in the gallery on this particular Tuesday morning, watching as Judge Ashford handled each case that came before him. She had been observing his progress regularly, and the difference in his demeanor was remarkable. Where once he had been quick to judge and harsh in his assumptions, he now listened carefully to each person's story and treated everyone with the same level of dignity she had shown him during their difficult encounter. The two had spent countless hours working together to create educational workshops that could help judges and law enforcement officers throughout the region recognize and overcome their prejudices. Emma had used her experience as a prosecutor to develop training materials that were both practical and powerful, while Judge Ashford had shared his own journey of transformation to show others that change was possible at any stage of their careers. Your Honor, Emma had told him during one of their planning meetings at the courthouse library, when we choose to grow from our mistakes instead of hiding from them, we can help heal our entire community. One person's willingness to change can create ripples that touch hundreds of other lives. Their unlikely partnership had become an inspiration throughout the city of Millbrook and beyond. Local newspapers had written extensive articles about their collaboration, calling it a powerful example of how understanding and forgiveness could triumph over prejudice and division. The story had been shared in legal journals and training programs across the state, inspiring other courts to examine their own practices and biases. Emma's grace and wisdom had transformed not just one judge, but an entire system of justice. Other prosecutors had reached out to her, asking for advice on how to address bias in their own courtrooms. Defense attorneys had praised the changes, noting that their clients were now being treated more fairly during proceedings. Even families of defendants commented on how much more comfortable they felt when attending court hearings. Officer Roberts had also undergone a complete transformation following that difficult night 3 months earlier. He had personally requested to attend every bias training session offered by the police department, and he had privately apologized to Emma for his behavior and the pain he had caused her. The conversation had been emotional for both of them, but it had led to a genuine friendship built on mutual respect and a shared commitment to justice. Roberts now worked closely with community groups throughout Millbrook to build better relationships between police officers and residents. He had started a program where officers attended neighborhood meetings to discuss concerns and answer questions. And he had implemented new protocols for traffic stops that emphasized respect and courtesy for all citizens. As Emma left the courthouse that day after observing another morning of fair and dignified proceedings, she reflected on how one difficult and painful moment had become a catalyst for a positive change throughout her entire community. She had learned through this experience that sometimes the greatest victories in life come not from fighting back against injustice, but from responding to it with wisdom, compassion, and a genuine desire to make things better for everyone. The community of Millbrook was stronger and more united because the people had chosen understanding over division, forgiveness over revenge, and hope over hatred. Their example had inspired others to examine their own hearts and minds, leading to conversations about bias and prejudice that had never happened before in their small town. Judge Ashford had said something to Emma just the week before that had become her guiding principle in both her personal life and her professional work as a prosecutor. They had been reviewing the success of their training programs when he looked at her with genuine gratitude and respect in his eyes. True justice isn't really about punishment, Emma, he had said thoughtfully. It's about helping people become better than they were before. You showed me that justice without compassion is just revenge, but justice with understanding can heal entire communities. Those words had touched Emma deeply because they captured exactly what she had always believed. About her work as a prosecutor, she had never wanted to simply punish people for their mistakes, but rather to help them understand the impact of their actions and find ways to make positive contributions to society. As she walked to her car that evening, Emma smiled as she thought about all the positive changes that had grown from one moment of choosing grace over anger. She knew that the work was far from finished, but she also knew that real change was possible when people were willing to open their hearts, admit their mistakes, and work together to build something better than what had existed before. The sun was setting over Millbrook, painting the sky in beautiful shades of orange and pink, and Emma felt hopeful about the future of justice in her community.